is the 10x engineer still relevant?
I don't want it to really worry about 10x engineer, but I can tell you one thing, Ramesh. In the era of ChatGPT and all the LLM models, every engineer has a equal ground to become a 10x engineer. Engineer's life is always cool. End of the
That's
day.
what everyone assumes as well. You sit in a dimly lit room, you have a big screen, it's on your laptop literally, and you're coding away to glory. But does it actually be so cool?
You should have full-time bandwidth on lights out and on tech depths. The tech depths are engineering. You need to do a
Tooling and
bringing a new version of existing platform. You want to do a refactoring of your existing code to be having better performance.
right.
As a product manager, as a product team, it's very, very important to partner with the GTM team, onboarding team, pre-sales, support. Be part of the conversation. You should basically help the GTM team to be able to communicate. In fact, that is one of the reasons why in a startup setup, engineers themselves get things done faster because they themselves realize that hey, it's important for a customer. Morning, Ramesh.
Good morning, Sri. That's a nice shirt.
Thank you. Man, I think it looks like you're sporting a new look, Ramesh.
Oh, yeah.
What's happening? I can make a guess.
Go ahead.
I remember the other day you're talking to, I think the candidate who came in. Right?
Oh, don't talk
He
about
said,
it.
hey, bro, and I mean, I think you're trying to give us sport a new mature look, Ramesh. I can see the impact of the guys coming in new. Gen Z, you're getting prepared for that, I guess.
So you kind of guessed the answer. I know you just wanted to embarrass me right in front of the camera, but that has been bothering me, Sri.
And I can imagine your conversation with him. Imagine that you're doing after a year, fast forward, give him a performance conversation.
Oh, tell me about it, right? He comes in and he says, hey bro, what's up? What's my rating? And if I don't have the right news to talk to him, then it's going to be a problem. So
I can see. I mean, that makes sense. But let's see how far he goes. But what's the reason? It looks like you're getting a spiritual mode.
Well, that too. But let me be honest and tell you that is definitely playing. The bro is playing in the back of my head, and I just took this as a time to be a little more spiritual. So I'm going to be heading out to the hills in about a couple of weeks from now, and let's see if I can make it from bro to Ramesh, or even bro is a.
Nothing, Ramesh. I know it's an important, it's an interesting thing, Ramesh. Other days, remember we were in Bangalore and we were in this. I forgot the club. One of the very vintage clubs, and we were trying to reach somebody, or one of our again smart, just a new joining, right? And then the coffee shop there. I mean, I think I was wearing a neck bunny or whatever, a shirt or t-shirt. I mean, and they didn't let us in. And
she just thought that you are too old enough that the club is only for the older generation and doesn't encourage the newer generation to get into a club without a collared shirt. So that's the state of affairs right now.
That's the generation gap here, Ramesh. Let's get started.
We'll live with that. And with that, welcome to yet another episode of Reset to Zero. And this is Sri and Ramesh trying to host this. A lot of things that's been happening around over the week from sales, marketing. But this time, I want to kind of get down to what Sri's more passionate about. Sri more, we've spoken about the product manager, the day in the life of a product manager. But I want to also touch the nerves literally about the world of engineering, right? You spoke about the product manager. You spoke about, in our last part, the day in the life of a product manager, right? The product manager does everything. And then finally, at the end of the day, the product manager sits with the engineer and translates all the whatever that he or she has gathered and says, okay, how can we get this done, right? So, but tell me more, what goes behind an engineer's day? Like, how does an engineer look at his or her day? In this new age specifically, there's more AI stuff coming in. Every software company, every engineer is going to be very AI focused. Every engineer is going to relate to AI. How does the engineering world change? Is one thing that I thought we would change, and the day in the life of an engineer, right? And more importantly, right? I think these are things that we would like to cover in this part. Is how does product and engineering meeting go? The P&E meeting that we've always looked forward to, right? So what happens there? Can you just? We'd love to hear.
Let me start with the first thing. I think there are two interesting questions there for any product development. And also, I mean, as the company from a startup, it just grows. The dynamics of a product engineering team decides the velocity at which you will ship, and hence you will keep the customer happy, right? But answering the first question, how does an engineer?
Wow, that sounds profound. The dynamics of an engineering team, influences the speed of execution from a product,
and it translates into the customer happiness, right? See, at the end of the day, the customer happiness is, of course, we give a lot to the customer facing teams, very very important. I've been part of those teams as well. But at the crux of it, if you have a happy product and engineering team, right? Let's say product managers, designers, and engineers. That's what I generally call the product team. If they're happy, you would see that customers happy. And this has been consistently I've seen in the last 25 years, right? From what I've seen, if the product team is happy, the customers are happy, right? That's the way, things happen over a period of time, right? But just going back to your original question, right? Hey, how does a data engineer looks? Yeah. But I will tell you, post GPT, I think I would give multiple phases, right? There was, if you just go back 15 years back,
Let's start there.
when suddenly the AWS of the world started showing up, right? There's an era where, I've been engineer pre-AWS era where I'm used to seeing a lab with about 20 computers.
That's
right?
true, because
Right.
every time Sri talks about his introduction in any meeting, he starts by saying, "Hey, I'm an engineer to a product manager and into an entrepreneur." It seems like a long time and like a dinosaur engineer. But how's it changing now? So, how are you working with engineers?
The AWS, the whole cloud era, right, where there was a different breed of engineers. Right? Post that there was more, I would say there were more of system engineers, less of app engineers, right? But the
Explain that a bit. System
engineers, people who write on a directly on the hardware. People used to write code on device drivers, things like that, right?
Okay.
See optimization. Most of the times, engineers
make that down.
Yeah. Most of the time, if you want to make an app faster, you have to spend time because the resources were very constrained, right? You have to run it on a single mission, right? And there was a constraint on the hardware you would run. Okay, good programmers, the so-called, the 10x engineers were born on that era who could write simple code which could run very fast, utilizing the least amount of hardware.
Oh, okay, got it.
That's
right. So that you just keep bandwidth in the hardware to run.
And that's when the whole 10x engineers started coming in because people write code and then the hardware was a constraint. But the cloud era, right, when you made the hardware a commodity, right, the focus started going into the applications you write. How easy the app could be, how fancy the app could be,
So that becomes more from a product perspective. But talking about the 10x engineer then, right, is the 10x engineer even relevant now? Like in this era of GPT, in this era of from a generative AI, everything the program can, is the 10x engineer still relevant?
I don't want to really worry about 10x engineer, but I can tell you one thing, Ramesh. In the era of ChatGPT and all the LLM models, every engineer has a equal ground to become a 10x engineer, right?
Yeah, that's a philosophical statement.
Today, like ChatGPT could basically give you the knowledge,
exactly,
right, which somebody would acquire through experience. Typically, that would translate into a person who could write simple, efficient code utilizing least of the resources, hardware resources, right? That's what I would say that's my definition of a 10x engineer. Everybody could have theirs.
Okay.
That is my definition of a 10x engineer. Now it's an even ground, with the cloud and the LLM. Things have become very commoditized. Anybody could write an efficient code. And if you have doubt, you can just ask GPT yourself.
Okay.
And make it more efficient.
So I think the 10x engineer, the ability to have more 10x engineers.
Everybody could become a very efficient programmer,
right.
I would say, right? That's the way I would look at it, right? Because there are tools today, right? If the person can use the tools efficiently,
and then you automatically
become speed, and then they can be more productive. In fact, they don't have to really slog through the night every day. You could basically write more efficient code right from day one. You could produce code with less number of bugs. So when you do a push to the production, it could be much easier, right?
Correct.
That's the whole idea, right? That's how things are evolving. When I used to be an engineer 15 years back, it's always burning the midnight oil because we find the bugs only when it goes to hits the mission, right? Today things have changed. We have different setup across the board. There is a beautiful CI system which translates the developer code to staging to pre-production to production because the hardware is a commodity today. So what used to be very, very hard, because we used to find bugs because we used to have only one mission in our lab, which would be as close as the customer setup. So it is just going to be very, very limited resources, right? And then it creates complication on the downstream, all of that. So when it comes to 10x engineer, just to close on that, there is an equal ground today. Everybody could, become one, kind of produce the outcome of a 10x engineer if there is one existing.
Fair enough.
Right?
I think that's great news.
Second thing, on an engineer's life, I think engineer's life is always cool, because end of the day,
everyone assumes as well. You sit in a dimly lit room, you have a big screen, it's on your laptop literally, and you're coding away to glory. But does it actually be so cool? Like,
could be. It is cool because end of the day, engineers.
Why?
maybe end of the day, they are the creators. End of the day, the bottom of the funnel. If you come from a GTM world, right? The bottom of the funnel is where the cream is, right? We get, and that's where you get celebrated, right? So engineers are on the bottom of the funnel, obviously, of the product development, right? And it is narrow, which means that there are only far and few, right? And that's the essence of it, right? Because they are on the bottom of the funnel of the product engineering. So you have to efficiently use their time and the bandwidth, and that's the most important thing.
Which that's a great. I mean, which brings me to the next part of the set of questioning is, you said 10x engineer, but those who are able to optimize for the hardware they're working on and give it more bandwidth to work on. Versus now you have the era of GPT where you're able to leverage that technology and become a 10x engineer faster. Uh, how does this translate into a product and an engineering kind of conversation that happens in a meeting? Because which case I would assume that because you can leverage technology purely in terms of GPT, are you able to ship features much faster?
Ramesh,
Is that an
boils down-
expectation?
it boils down to the size of the team, Ramesh, and the face of the the company and the product. For example, if you start looking at engineering efficiency, right, the moment you basically get into the mode of trying to make your engineering efficient, right, you tend to waste a lot of time. Maybe a lot of people might not like to hear that, but that's a reality, right?
Okay.
The moment you basically start doing engineering perfection, that's what I'm saying. 15 years back, engineers used to basically write the perfect code. Today, it's a commodity, right?
Okay.
It's not about writing, the most efficient code out in the world.
Absolutely.
Because the hardware is a
And
commodity.
you've always been recommending that even to our engineers. The question is, because you're not expected to write the most beautiful code, because it can be
There's a beautiful code is important because the other person can understand it. But writing the most efficient code, efficient processes, right? You'll write the most simple code, which is easy for everybody else to understand, so that somebody else can work on it. But looking at engineering processes and trying to bring efficiency is even a need only when you have a larger setup, right? For example, that's the reason, Ramesh, in a startup setup, they could ship, faster, even more complex things. You could see even in high performer, the kind of features we've been shipping with a very small team. I don't think, I would have imagined this even in a larger setup at this pace.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, the smaller teams are doing, are compromising on craftsmanship. That's not the case. They probably are even setting up a very high bar for craftsmanship, right? The reason being, it's a very small knit team. The trust is very, very high, right? And more importantly, there's absolute clarity on the short-term goals, for the smaller teams, right? And there's a significant amount of trust which is established when you're a very small team. They become very close, the product manager, the designer, and the architect engineer. They become, pretty good friends, right? They sleep, they close the discussion, they kind of connect in the morning, they come back, they regroup, they enjoy this
I
conversation.
have seen that. Happening in our organization at High Performer itself, where the previous evening we're just discussing an idea of how we can envisage it.
Correct.
And then there's a designer who kind of comes and puts together a visual representation of how it looks.
Correct.
The back-end engineer kinds of looks at it and starts from an architecture perspective,
Right.
starts looking at it. And then by the morning, you literally have something up and working and ready, right? It could be buggy, but it's ready in some sense. And that's fantastic to see, because what you just looking at in the previous evening, the idea from an evening to a product. So the I to P is literally about 24 hours that I think.
Correct. It's like a river, flowing river. But the big difference is that there's no check dam.
How is this different from?
Yeah, that's where I'm coming. Like in a larger setup, imagine a river with a check dam,
Okay.
right? Then
What is the check dam?
typically let's look at a river, like, and when you have a dam in the middle, what happens, right? People on both the sides, they basically have conflicts, right?
Okay.
There's somebody who would regulate the water flow, and I want to talk about that. I mean, you've been
No, you should talk about it,
Yeah.
because this is important for us to understand how are we able to ship much faster now versus what's the check down that comes in a larger organization. I think it's important to understand that.
No, I think, see, if you all do that during a meeting, you just have to take a step back. Like, what happens in a larger setup, right? Typically, when you basically start accumulating customers, right? This is the common thing which happens, right? This is basically after you get 100 customers, then you get, the 1,000 customers. You bring in, multiple people, right, on the GTM side.
Of course.
So there is not just two people who are founders who are talking to customers, but you have, let's say, 20 people, 30 people, and that
Okay.
goes on increasing. Now, the customer, the closeness to the customer and the product team is also kind of distant. There's a gap. Now, you will have product managers. You kind of send them out like your troops. They talk to different stakeholders, right?
Correct.
From a pre-sales engineer to
Customer,
a
yeah, the
support
customers.
engineer, to an onboarding engineer, to a customer specialist, to a customer themselves. They try to correlate. They try to collect a big laundry list of features, so-called wish list, right? And they go look at the competitions. They increase the list size, and each of product managers come with their own laundry list of items to be done.
Right.
Now, in a large setup, that's when this becomes a ritual, where you go through the process of getting through a shortlisted list of features. But what we all
When
forget
is
is
this list curated? Like, does it happen in the beginning of the year, like in AOP that we discussed about?
similar. Similar.
Okay.
In fact, typically like how you like a AOP, right? There is also an annual planning happens for a product engineering group with a larger setup because of the larger setup, the nature of the larger setup, and you want to be more predictable to your customers. So you start, curating this list and you start giving a priority list. Of course, 60-70% of
I
that.
heard the term by the former late STS, right? He's passionate about this global priority list.
Of course.
Tell us more about what happens inside that room.
So typical, the intent there is to basically get to at least 60-70% of clarity on what you want to do for the next, let's say, the 12 months.
Okay.
Right? That's what the whole exercise is all about, right? And you start curating. The product managers, they basically own the responsibility of trying to figure out what needs to be done.
Okay.
They go and figure out, hey, what needs to be done in this reasonable time we have, right? In the next 6 months time. So they come back with a list. They were expected to give you a prioritized list, right? They talk to the senior management, the management stakeholders, and they try to curate that list. That's the number one.
Right. Is that the product's responsibility to curate the list, or is it the engineer?
No, it is actually
Help us play that.
the
meeting
global
scenario.
priority list is a combination of product manager. The engineers will come back and say, "Hi, we need to do few things to keep the lights on, right? The tech depths, right? The so-called things which is required to keep the lights on." So it's a combination of all of that. A good seasoned product manager would always give a balance, give 30-40% of your bandwidth for keeping the lights on, because that's very, very
Right.
important when you have customers. But what really matters is this one list, which is clearly a prioritized list that the entire team can focus. When you have a 100-member team, you need to start doing that. That's the most important thing, because you don't have a choice, but just to keep it clear, because the entire 100-member team should know what is my goal at the end of the year as a product team, just to get the alignment and all of that is absolutely important. But what happens is that over a period of time, you start over-engineering the list, right? That's when the whole delay happens, things like that creeps in. But Ramesh, end of the day, you have to realize it's all about execution. Doesn't matter whether you have a prioritized list.
So here is where this whole thing comes up, right? We discuss on this entire list of global prioritization list.
Correct.
And then the product managers who have curated this list, right?
Correct.
A lot goes behind even curating that list that is kind of put up. And let's assume for a second that it's running late. There's the shipping of these products
Yes.
is running late, and there are customers waiting with a knife.
or a knife comes
Right?
in the picture.
Because based on that list, I'm sure the sales guys are committing newer features
Absolutely.
and what's coming up, right? And let's assume there's a $100,000 feature that counts, $100,000 deal that counts, and the deal breaker is shipping X feature out, and the customer is ready to pay for it. How soon can the engineer execute it?
So this is the question I've heard like a zillion times, Ramesh, right?
Which
And,
is?
hey, how soon can you get it done? How can you get it done
Fair
soon,
enough.
right? And I've heard it from everybody, right? But I've learned this from late STS, right? 9 women can't deliver a baby in a 1 month, right? So you need a time, right? So if you ever get a deliver a baby, you need to have 10 months. So it takes what it takes to deliver things. But this is my learning. This is my playbook as a product manager.
Have you ever? I'm sure you had this knife coming in. You had this feature. Can you talk to us about how it went inside the room? Like,
Yeah, I mean, generally,
Use
this is
an
what happens,
example.
right? The moment you bring in a GTM person in the room, we've been through that, your annual rituals of AOP planning and all of that.
so Sri, why don't you give us a view with an example of how this has played in your previous roles, right? You've talked about saying you can't have 9 women to give birth a child in a month. That seems profound. So, Sri, help us play this role, because there's you said something very profound. You said,
Hopefully.
I mean, let's take STS's word. The STS was an engineering manager at Freshworks, engineering lead, VP of engineering at Freshworks.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that he says you can't birth nine, you can't have 9 women birth a child in a month. You need to give it 9 months to birth a child, to bear a child from a single mother, right? Which sounds very profound. How has this played in your previous role? Like, can you talk about how has it come? What is the feature that came to you? What was the MRR like?
I'll give an example.
I would love to
This
hear
is
that.
what happens, right? Typically, see, if you look at it, as we grow and you have hundreds of customers, thousands of customers, right? You need to bring the balance, right, into your product roadmap. There's something called as product roadmap. We start celebrating in a larger setup, right? So there is always a competition there. End of the day, like I said, the bottom of the funnel is the engineering resource, right? So which means that there's only so much you can do, right? If you basically have, let's say, a team of 100 engineers, let's assume you can only do 10 features, large features, the customer impact.
Fair enough. Global priority list.
Doesn't matter whether you stand upside down. What you can do is only 10 features.
Right.
Now,
And that features in the global priority list.
it's up to you. You can bring me from wherever you want to bring it.
Okay.
But end of the day, the bottom of the funnel, which is basically the bandwidth for an engineering to deliver, is only 10 features.
Okay.
Right? Now you have 100 features coming from different stakeholders. Right. Now that is when there is an important aspect of prioritization. Right. The product manager, the product leader, typically it would be the head of the product or the business leader, have to do something called a trade-off.
Okay.
What would you trade off, right, for a feature you want to pick? Because you can only pick 10.
Fair enough. Because
So that is basically the most important aspect of being a product manager. You need to learn to, better at the art of doing a trade-off.
Sounds very right. How does it play out in a practical scenario?
I'll give an example, right? So this is what my playbook, the last, I would say, 10, 15 years of me running multiple products, I would basically allocate bandwidth for different themes, right? I would start with lights on. What does it take to keep your product up and running where existing customers doesn't have any problem, right? Could be the bug fixing. Allocate 30% of the bandwidth. You should not even think about it. Allocate 30% back, because the end of the day, if the existing customers are not happy, you cannot basically do anything better, right? And that's the number one. 30% goes there, right? 20% goes on the tech debt. How do you make it more faster, efficient? It's very, very important for even a new customer. Which
Is that a full-time role?
it's a full-time bandwidth.
Bandwidth?
It doesn't matter how many engineers you have.
Yeah. Is there a full-time bandwidth?
100%. Yeah,
fixing.
You should have full-time bandwidth on lights out and on tech depths. The tech depths are engineering. You need to do a
Tooling and
bringing a new version of existing platform. You want to do a refactoring of your existing code to be having better performance.
Right.
That's fundamentally means you just get 50% of your bandwidth out of the block. So the rest of the 50% is the one you can deal with the 100 features you have.
Right.
I'm a very customer first person. I generally allocate 25 to 30% bandwidth to handle customer ask, right? And within the customer ask, 80% of them, I would being a SaaS multi-tenant product, I would always optimize for a feature which is impacting as many customers as possible, right? And of course, you need to allocate 10% of the bandwidth for your top 5%, 10% of the customers who are paying high MRR. Otherwise, that 10% customers would not leave you to the rest of the 90%. So which means that allocate 30% for lights on, 20% for tech debt, right? 20% for new features, right? 20 to 30% existing customers, top customers, right? This is a trade-off you have to make. And this you can revisit every quarter. The value proposition can change plus or minus. There might be one quarter you might allocate 30% for new features. You might have to slow down the existing customers. So it's at the end of the day a balance.
Let me get to the point. Have you ever said no to shipping a feature which is worth 100,000?
Many times. Many times. Because it's important to say no. In fact, I have said, as I said, I always had a basket of 90, 100 features.
Right.
I always picked only 10, which means that I had to say 90 times no. And I probably was one of these, product managers who had said more no's than yes. Right? That's very, very important. You should exactly
communicate that to the GTM, because it can be a bummer for them, right? Here's a 100K deal that's coming my way. My product manager, my engineering team is just letting me down because it's there on the priority list. It's just that it came way earlier than it's meant to be shipped. And here I am. It's very deep. It could get demotivating.
No, that's where, Ramesh, I think you have to be part of the solutioning team. We should have skin in the game, right? and most importantly, the role of a product manager, in a GTM conversation is to really explain why you need to say no. It is even more important to really say no. You should really understand when to say no to a customer more than saying yes. If you are basically a product manager who only is going to say yes, then your product over a few quarters will be clunky. Okay. So as a product manager, as a product team, it's very, very important to partner with the GTM team, onboarding team, pre-sales, support, be part of the conversation. You should basically help the GTM team to be able to communicate them. And if you basically have challenges, you show up in the meeting. In fact,
that's my next piece of it, right? So we spoke about the product managers being a part of the GDM team. They come and speak to them. You're part in front of the customers. When do you expose engineering team in front of the customer, like important customer meetings? Does that happen?
It's not about engineers, Ramesh, right? See, of course, you did that, and I'll answer that question. But just to close on my initial thought, right? It is a responsibility of the product team. More importantly, the product manager to communicate the no to the customer. It is not the responsibility of the GTM person. The GTM person has to partner with the GTM person because, like you said, if it is a no, it's a no to the customer, and it has to be communicated by the product manager because he or she is the one who's making the decision. So it is a team which represents, and it is a combination of both GTM and the product has to go back, convince them that the solution which they provide would not need that capability, and that is one. Now, answering your question, when do you expose a customer, engineer to the customer? It has to be done on a daily basis, right? In fact, in the past,
did they enjoy it as much? Because engineers speak well with the machine, right? Engineers speak well with the code, but do engineers? I've seen predominantly, hey, don't try and get me in front of the customer. I would like for you tell me what goes on. That's the engineer's mindset, right?
So, I'm an engineer. I always used to love to have a conversation.
You've started with 1 minute, but
I will tell you how we can do it, right? See,
how do you get there?
Yeah, you have to commoditize that, right? Instead of expecting the engineers to basically have a conversation with your engineer, with your customers, create an avenues, channels where the engineers know the customer problem upfront. Mm-hmm. It cannot be like a second or third person's voice. You should basically try to remove all the intermediary people in that middle because there's a lot of translation error. In fact, what I've seen in the past is basically translation errors. When somebody translates a customer ask to an engineer,
that ends up Chinese whisper. Yeah,
that's the most important thing. In fact, that is one of the reasons why in the startup setup, engineers themselves get things done faster because they themselves realize that it's important for a customer. See, end of the day, engineers are also human. Of course, when they know that, and they're also very sensible humans, right? When they know that what they're going to do,
engineers are the reason why we are shipping.
No, but it is very important to also realize that when an engineer understands, when the product manager, when the GTM person makes an effort to, kind of help the engineer understand the customer problem, 60% of the problem is done.
Fair enough,
right? And that is where, the product managers fail. They try to basically hold, the trump card of a customer. It really doesn't matter. The voice of the customer should be heard by the engineer.
Okay.
More importantly, right? And if you have an organization which is kind of set up with that team, I will tell you, engineers will ship really fast and they will ship with less number of bugs.
And how do you orchestrate that? So because you just mentioned something like voice of the customer integrating into the entire piece of the puzzle, right? How do you orchestrate that?
I generally, in fact, in all my conversations, Ramesh, when I talk to my engineers, I always bring in anecdotes from customers. Always. In fact, the responsibility of a good product leader is to get the outside in view into the team, right? That is one.
Fair enough.
I will basically bring my friendly customers into my meetings with the team. Right? Have them interact, have them have a very casual conversation, right? The reason why engineers sometimes would not want to be on a customer call is that most of the meetings you put them on a tough conversation where the customer would ask a feature and you bring the engineer to give them a timely answer, right? That's the last thing you should worry about. It's going to take all these product development is going to take time, right? There is no company in the world which basically has figured out, to ship features with absolutely zero bugs. There's nobody in the world. If you think there's somebody, just let me know. I'm not seen them yet, right? So that's a kind of reality. But what we do is that we try to put them on the spot. You try to ask them for time. If you don't do that, instead you make it as a learning experience for an engineer on the product team. I think conversation will be much more fruitful, and that's what happens more often in the startup, right? The founders and the early stage engineers, they all have fun understanding what the customer problem is,
right?
And they look at it solving it. And that's the true essence of really customer solving, the essence of having the team, right? Understand the customer problem and go experiment in solving it. And you learn, you iterate, and you figure out what's the best option, and then you go on with it, and then you hopefully get the happy customers.
Fantastic. That's been awesome. I'll
Yep.
probably end this with one last question that has been playing in my mind as I've kind of asked it is how does a product manager help manage the engineer's bandwidth in some reason? Because you mentioned that it is the responsibility of the product manager to also kind of give them the world view of what's happening, why are certain features important, and then you put a code for it. But the engineer is already working on a specific set of features. Let's assume everything is going fine, it's hunky dory. But how does an engineer help? Maybe you also mentioned a designer comes into the play.
Yeah.
How do they help manage the bandwidth of an engineer to get the best out of it?
No, I think, Ramesh, I think, like I said, end of the day, the engineering capacity, the bandwidth, like how other day you mentioned about sales capacity, it's all about engineering capacity, which determines your output.
Absolutely.
That's a very, very important thing, right? So one of the most important things, I just kind of learned it hard way, right? It comes through practice. A product manager, should optimize for shipping it. A lot of times what happens is that
Absolutely.
and there's a lot of iteration happens before even you ship, right? Because end of the day, it's all about ideas, and the product manager gets into the whole creative funnel, right, along with the designer, and they should not keep changing things even before it hits the production, right? If you want to change it, you can change it, but you ship, get feedback, and you can do that iterative loop.
So do you have the number of iterations that you should have, or how does it go?
No, I mean, ideally, you should not, you should just ship fast, right?
Right.
And what it means is that have clarity on what you want, right? Arrive at a solution which is simple, like focus on execution to ship it, which means that I would always use the 80-20 rule. As a product manager, as a product team, right? Figure out a way to understand the 20% of the use case, which will impact 80% of customers. And it's going to take time. But over a period of time, if you can get closer to that 80-20 rule where 20% of the use cases, which is the most important thing, understand, get that clarity on the 20% use case, which can impact 80% of the customers, I think you can ship faster and you'll also probably have happy customers.
Wow. It just seems like the perfect engineering, product design, and GTM team here at High Performance.
Okay.
Hopefully, it continues. It's all about execution. It's all about getting to the customer, getting the feature to the customer, and obviously, you want to counting the bugs that come in. With that, this is probably the end of yet another episode of Research is Zero. We've spoken a lot about what happens in an engineering product design kind of setup. How are they working with the GTM teams to ship fast?
Yeah.
And more importantly, I think the one thing that I will go away with this is you can't have 9 mothers to birth a child, right? It will take its time. You have to give the engineers 9 months to probably get the best out of them.
Yeah, and
figuratively,
I would just do this, right? Ship fast, ship happy, right? And
all right.
Thank you, Ramesh. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Please do drop in your comments. We enjoy talking about these room scenarios, what happens inside a product and engineering, what happens within sales and marketing, what happens in the leadership team. So tell us what you want us to talk about next, and we should be more than happy with that. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.